Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Business English for Success. I'm Elena.
And I'm David.
When you work with clients in English, the conversation can change very quickly. A client may explain what they need, ask for an update, change a deadline, request something extra, or ask you to confirm something you're not ready to promise yet.
And in those moments, knowing a few polite phrases isn't always enough. You need to understand what the client really needs, explain your work clearly, respond when something changes, and keep the conversation moving toward a useful next step.
So, in this lesson, we'll practice practical English you can use in real client conversations, from everyday requests and updates to more difficult moments when expectations, timing, or requirements change. And you won't just listen to examples. Later in the lesson, you'll hear complete client conversations and get a chance to respond to the client yourself.
But let's start with the moment that comes before almost everything else. A client tells you what they want. It sounds clear, but is it clear enough for you to act on?
A client request can sound clear long before it is actually ready to work from.
Imagine a client says, "We'd like to make the next version easier for our regional teams to use."
You understand the direction. They want the next version to work better for those teams.
But if you take that sentence back to your own team, what exactly are you asking them to change?
That's the important difference. In a client conversation, understanding the words is not always the same as having a workable request.
So instead of trying to respond to the whole request immediately, help the client make the result more concrete.
You might say, when you say easier for the regional teams to use, what would you like them to be able to do more easily?
The client explains.
They should be able to find the right information quickly without reading through the whole document. Now you know much more. The client isn't simply asking for something to feel easier. They want people to find the information they need faster.
That gives you something you can actually work with.
But the conversation may still develop.
You ask, are there particular sections people are having trouble finding?
And the client says, yes, the contact information and the steps they need to follow are the main ones.
Now the request is becoming more specific. You're no longer working from make it easier.
You're working from something closer to help regional teams find the contact information and required steps more quickly.
And there's another thing that matters before you start changing the work. What are you hoping to do with the next version?
The client replies, we want to use it during onboarding next month.
That changes the picture again. This isn't just a document people may look at occasionally. It will be used to help new people get started.
So your next response can show that you now understand the working need. Understood. So the main goal is to make the key information easier for new regional team members to find during onboarding.
That response does more than show that you were listening. It turns several pieces of conversation into one usable picture.
And sometimes the client will correct that picture.
Mostly, yes. But it isn't only for new employees. Existing teams will use it as a quick reference, too.
That correction is useful. Your first understanding was close, but not complete.
So you adjust. Got it. Then it needs to work both for onboarding and as something people can return to later when they need a quick answer.
Now both uses are visible.
This is why client communication often develops in stages.
The first sentence gives you a direction. The next part of the conversation helps you understand what that direction means in the actual work.
And you don't always need a long discussion. Sometimes one short exchange is enough. Imagine a client says, could we make the presentation shorter? You could immediately start deleting slides, but shorter could mean different things. So you might ask, would you like a shorter presentation time, or do you mainly want fewer details on the slides? The client says, "The presentation time is fine. We just want the main message to be easier to see."
That is a very different piece of work. You may not need a shorter presentation at all. You may need a clearer one.
And you could respond, "Understood. We'll keep the overall length, but make the main points more visible and reduce some of the supporting detail."
Now the request has moved from a general preference to a practical direction.
The same thing can happen when a client uses words like more professional, simpler, more detailed, or more suitable for our audience.
Those words may tell you what the client feels is missing, but they don't always tell you what the finished work should actually do differently.
So your job is not to collect as many questions as possible. It is to help the conversation reach a point where you can clearly understand the result the client expects.
And before you move on, it can help to put that result into your own words, not as a formal summary, just enough to make the working picture clear.
For example, so the priority is to make the key steps easier to find while keeping the detailed information available for people who need it.
Or, so we're keeping the same overall content, but changing how the main message is presented.
Those responses show that the conversation has produced something useful. You know what kind of result the client is looking for.
And once you reach that point, another risk appears. You may understand the client's request clearly, but that doesn't automatically mean the client has the same picture of what you are going to deliver.
That's what we need to deal with next.
Imagine you've just had a 10-minute conversation with a client. You discussed what they need, what should be included, when they want to review it, and one piece of information they still need to send you.
At that point, you could simply say, "Okay, we'll get started." But there's a better opportunity before the conversation moves on. Take the important information you've just discussed and put it into one clear picture.
For example, so we'll prepare the first version with the 3 sections we discussed, and we'll send it to you for review by Wednesday. You'll send us the final product details before then.
Notice how much that one response does. It identifies what your team will prepare. It shows what is included. It separates the review point from everything that happens later. And it makes the client's responsibility clear too.
You're not repeating the whole conversation. You're pulling together the parts that could affect the work if either side understands them differently.
That short confirmation can also catch a misunderstanding immediately. Let's say you tell the client, "We'll send you the completed version on Thursday, including the new comparison section." And the client replies, "Thursday is actually the review date. We'd like to make any final changes after that and have the completed version ready on Monday after your feedback."
That small correction matters. Thursday hasn't changed, but what Thursday means has changed completely.
So your response can develop with the new information. Understood. We'll have the review version ready for Thursday, and we'll plan for the completed version on Monday after your feedback.
Both sides now have the same timeline.
The same issue can happen with scope. Suppose you've discussed several pieces of work, but only some of them belong in the current project.
Instead of leaving that distinction inside a long conversation, you can make it visible. For this stage, we'll update the main document and the supporting chart. The additional summary can be handled separately if you decide you need it.
That makes an important boundary clear. 2 items are part of the work now. 1 is not yet part of the current scope. And notice that you don't need heavy contract language to make that distinction. Simple English can still make the boundary very clear. Responsibility is another place where assumptions can cause problems. Maybe your team can begin the work, but one part depends on something the client needs to provide.
You could say, we can start with the information we have now. For the final section, we'll need the updated figures from your team by Friday.
The client now knows 2 things. Your team can move forward, but one part still depends on information from their side.
Another important point is what has not been decided yet. Imagine the client is considering an extra version for another market, but they haven't decided whether they need it. You don't want that possibility to quietly become part of the agreed work. So you might say, we'll move ahead with the current version for now. The additional version is still not confirmed yet, so we won't include that at this stage.
That keeps a possible future request separate from the work you've actually agreed to do.
Let's put several pieces together. Imagine you've just finished discussing a new client project. The client needs a short information pack for a partner event. Your team will prepare the first version. The client will provide 2 final figures. They want to review the work on Tuesday, and they mentioned a second version, but they haven't decided whether they need it.
A useful confirmation might sound like this. So for Tuesday, we'll prepare the first version of the information pack using the material we already have. You'll send us the 2 final figures before then. We'll keep the second version separate until you decide whether you want to move forward with it.
That is much more useful than repeating every detail from the discussion. It gives both sides a clear working picture. What your team is doing, what the client needs to provide, what the next review point is, and what is still undecided.
And the exact details will change from one client to another. You might be discussing a report, a technical change, a set of documents, an analysis, or something completely different. But the communication job stays the same.
Before the conversation ends, make sure both sides are leaving with the same understanding of the work.
Because once that work begins, your client will need something different from you. They'll need to understand what is happening, where the work stands, and what matters to them as the work moves forward.
And this is where a client update can become difficult. You know everything your team has been doing. The client usually doesn't need all of it.
Imagine your team is preparing a set of documents for a client. During the week, your team has reviewed the original files, corrected several formatting issues, checked the data, discussed 2 questions internally, and prepared a new version.
All of that may matter to your team, but what does the client actually need to know? Probably not every internal step. They may simply need to know what is ready, what still needs attention, whether anything affects them, and what happens next. So instead of walking through everything your team has done, you could say, the updated documents are ready for your review. We've completed the main changes, and we're still checking 2 figures in the final section. That won't affect your review today, and we'll send you the confirmed figures tomorrow morning.
That gives the client a useful picture without giving them an internal work diary. They know what is ready. They know what is not finished. They know whether it affects them. And they know what will happen next.
That lapped part is important. A client often needs more than status. They need to understand what the status means for them.
Imagine one part of the work is taking longer than expected. You could say, we're still completing the final review, so that part will be ready tomorrow instead of today.
That explains the status, but the client may immediately wonder, does that change what I need to do?
So when it matters, add the consequence. We're still completing the final review, so that part will be ready tomorrow instead of today. You can continue reviewing the rest of the material today, so your schedule doesn't need to change.
The client knows not only what is happening, but how it affects their work.
The client may also need to understand why something is being done before they can make a decision.
Suppose your team is preparing an analysis, and you decide to separate the results into 2 groups. The client asks why. You could give them every technical reason behind the decision, but that may make the explanation harder to follow. Instead, connect the decision to something the client cares about. We separated the results into 2 groups because the patterns are quite different. This should make it easier for you to see which issues need attention first.
The explanation is simple, but it still tells the client both what you did and why it matters.
The same principle works when you need to explain a process. You don't always need to describe every step. Give the client enough information to understand what will happen and where they may need to be involved.
For example, we'll review the files first and identify anything that needs clarification. Then we'll send you one list of questions so your team can respond in one place.
The client now understands the process. And more importantly, they know when they will need to take action.
There will also be times when the work cannot move forward completely without something from the client. You can make that clear without making the whole update sound like a problem.
For example, the first 2 sections are ready. We can finish the last section once we receive the updated numbers from your team. If we receive them by Thursday, we can keep the current review date.
That gives the client 4 useful pieces of information: what is ready, what is waiting, what you need from them, and what timing depends on that information.
What happens when the client asks a follow-up question?
You've just told the client, we've completed the main content and we're doing a final check before we send the review version tomorrow.
The client asks, is there anything you need from us before then?
If nothing is blocking the work, you can answer directly. Nothing at the moment. We have what we need for this version. Once you receive it tomorrow, we'll need your feedback on the final 2 sections.
That response answers the question and also prepares the client for their next role in the process.
But suppose the situation is slightly different. You're still waiting for one item from them.
Then you could say, yes, we still need the latest pricing table from your team. We can continue with the rest of the work, but we'll need that before we can complete the final page.
Again, the useful information is not simply, we're waiting for the pricing table. The client also learns what can continue and what cannot be completed yet.
This way of communicating transfers easily to different kinds of work. If you're preparing a financial analysis, the client may need to know which numbers are confirmed and which ones still need verification.
If you're working on a technical change, they may need to know what has been completed, what is being tested, and whether they need to do anything before the next step.
And if you're preparing business documents, they may need to know which documents are ready and which ones still depend on information from their side.
The details are different. The communication job is the same.
Give the client enough information to understand the work and make the next step clear. That often means choosing from 4 things: what is ready, what still remains, what it means for the client, and what happens next.
You won't need all 4 every time. The goal is not to force every update into the same formula. The goal is to choose the information that helps the client understand the situation.
And when the work continues as expected, that may be all the client needs.
But client conversations don't always stay inside the original plan.
The client may come back with a new request. They may want something added, changed, or delivered sooner than you originally discussed.
And when that happens, the question is no longer just, how do I keep the client informed? It becomes, how do I respond when what the client wants has changed?
This can happen even when the work is already moving forward. They may want to add something, or they may want one part done differently. Or they need something earlier than you originally discussed.
The change can sound small at first. That's when it can be easy to respond too quickly.
Imagine your team is preparing a set of materials for a client. The first version is already being developed, and the client has seen the agreed structure.
Then the client says, could we add a short section for new partners as well?
Your first reaction might be, sure, we can add that.
But you don't know enough yet. A short section might mean a few additional lines, or it might require new information, new examples, and more work than you expect.
So first, acknowledge the request without confirming the work too early.
Yes, we can look at adding that. What would you like the new section to help partners understand?
Then the client explains. We mainly want them to understand how the program works and what they need to do to get started.
That gives you a much clearer picture. At this point, the change still sounds manageable.
So you might respond, okay, we can work that into the current structure. We'll need to adjust one part of the material, but the main content can stay as it is.
But then the client adds something else.
Actually, we'll also need a separate version that our partners can send directly to their customers.
That changes the situation. This is no longer just one short section inside the existing work. The client is asking for another version for a different audience.
So your response needs to change too. You could say, that would be a larger change than adding the partner section. We can keep working on the current version, but I'd like to check what the second version would involve before I confirm the timing for both.
Here, the new detail changes the impact of the request. You didn't reject the new request. You also didn't treat it as if nothing had changed.
You identified the difference between the original change and the new one. You protected the work that can still continue. And you avoided promising a timeline before you understood the full impact.
That last point matters because one client change can affect several parts of the work at the same time. It may change what you need to produce. It may require information you don't currently have. And it may affect when the work can realistically be ready.
So when a request changes, don't only ask, what does the client want now? Also think, what does this change affect?
In some cases, the answer is simple. Very little changes. In that case, you can communicate that clearly.
For example, we can add that to the current version. It won't change the delivery date.
In others, one part of the original plan needs to move.
Then the client needs to know the trade-off. We can move that item forward, but we'd need to complete the supporting section after the first delivery.
That is more useful than simply saying, we'll try. The client can now see what is still possible and what would need to change.
Timing changes can work the same way. Suppose a client says, we've moved our internal meeting to Wednesday. Could you send us the analysis a day earlier?
Before answering, the important question is not only whether Tuesday sounds possible. You need to know what the earlier date changes in the work.
If most of the analysis can still be completed, but one part may need more time, you could say, we should still be able to give you the main analysis by Tuesday. I need to check whether the final comparison can be completed by then as well.
That response separates what appears possible from what still needs to be checked. You're giving the client useful information without pretending you already know everything.
Here's one more kind of change. A client may not add more work, they may change what matters most.
Imagine they say, the detailed breakdown is less important now. What we really need first is a short version for the leadership team.
That changes the priority rather than simply increasing the amount of work.
A useful response could be, we can shift the focus to the short version first. I'll check how that affects the timing of the detailed breakdown and come back to you with the updated plan.
Again, you're not treating every change the same way. An added requirement, an earlier deadline, and a new priority can affect the work differently.
And your English should help make that impact visible.
When a client changes the request, several things are happening inside the conversation. First, understand what has actually changed. Then, look at what that change affects. Be clear about what can still move forward, and if something needs to be checked, don't turn it into a promise too early. That doesn't mean making every client request sound difficult. If the change is simple and you know it can be done, say so. But when the impact isn't clear yet, your response should leave room for you to find out. And that leads to a harder moment in client communication. What if the client doesn't just make a new request? What if they want an answer from you right now?
And you genuinely can't confirm it yet?
A client may want a clear answer before you have everything you need to give one.
In that moment, the useful question is not simply, can I say yes or no? It is, what can I responsibly commit to right now?
Imagine a client asks, "Can you have everything ready by Thursday?"
Most of the work is on track, but one final section depends on information you're still waiting for.
If you say, "Yes, Thursday should be fine," the client may reasonably hear that everything is committed for Thursday.
A more accurate response would be, we're on track to have the main work ready by Thursday. I still need to confirm the final section because we're waiting for one piece of information.
Now the client can separate the commitment you can make from the part you cannot confirm yet.
And give them a clear return point. I should have that confirmed by tomorrow afternoon, and I'll update you then.
That is much more useful than making the whole answer sound uncertain.
Suppose the client asks, "Can you send us both versions on Monday?"
You know the first version can be ready. The second still needs checking.
You can say, "The first version will be ready on Monday. I'm still checking the timing for the second one, and I'll confirm that with you by tomorrow."
The first commitment stays firm, only the second remains open. That distinction matters with clients because they may be planning their own work around your answer. There are also times when the full request is not possible, but part of it is. The client asks, "Could we have the full analysis first thing tomorrow morning?"
The complete analysis will not be ready that early, but the main findings will. You could say,
"The full analysis won't be ready tomorrow morning, but we can send you the main findings by 10 a.m. and follow with the complete version in the afternoon."
You haven't promised something you can't deliver. You've given the client a partial option they can decide whether to use.
An alternative can also change the work rather than the timing.
For example, we can prepare an initial estimate with the information available now. For a final figure, we'll need the updated data from your team.
Again, the client can see what is available now and what is required before you can go further.
And if you need time before making any commitment, make the follow-up itself specific. I need to check this with the project team. I'll come back to you by 3 p.m. with what we can realistically deliver.
You may not be able to commit to the client's request yet, but you can commit to what happens next.
That is the key distinction. Be firm about what you know, careful about what you don't, and useful about the options in between.
But sometimes the problem isn't a new request or an answer you can't confirm.
The client is concerned about something that has already happened, or something that is happening now.
And in that situation, giving more information isn't always enough. First, you need to understand exactly what the client is concerned about.
Imagine your team has sent a client the first version of a project summary. The client has reviewed it and says,
"I'm concerned that this version is too detailed. Our leadership team won't have time to go through all of this before the meeting."
There are several ways you could react. You could immediately defend the work, or you could immediately agree that the version is wrong.
But neither response helps you understand the real problem. Start with the concern itself.
You might say, "I understand. Is the main concern the length, or is there specific information you don't think the leadership team needs?"
Then the client gives you more information. The detail is useful. The problem is that they need to make a decision at the meeting, and I don't think the main recommendation is clear enough.
That changes the situation. The problem isn't simply that the document is too long. The client needs the decision makers to see the recommendation quickly.
Your response should change with that information.
That makes sense. In that case, I'd suggest putting the recommendation and the key reasons at the beginning, then keeping the detailed analysis behind it for anyone who needs it.
You're responding to the actual concern, and you've given the client an option that fits what their leadership team needs to do.
But suppose the client adds one more detail. The meeting has also moved to tomorrow morning. We need something we can send out today.
There is a timing issue, too. The recommendation still needs to be easier to see, but you also have less time to make the change.
The response needs to become more specific. We can prepare a shorter decision summary today with the recommendation, the key reasons, and the main figures. My recommendation would be to send that before the meeting and keep the full analysis as the supporting document.
First, it sounded like a problem with length. Then you learned the real issue was decision clarity. Then timing became important too.
And each new piece of information changed what a useful response looked like.
This is why acknowledging a concern doesn't mean you have to agree with every conclusion the client makes.
Suppose a client says, "I thought this section was supposed to be finished already."
If your understanding is different, you don't need to say, "Yes, you're right, we're late."
You can acknowledge what matters and explain the relevant fact. I understand why you're checking. The first version was scheduled for today, and the completed version is due after your review on Friday.
But it also doesn't accept a problem that may actually be a misunderstanding.
And if there has been a change on your side, be clear about that too.
For example, you're right that we originally planned to send this today. One part of the review is taking longer than expected, so we now expect to have it ready tomorrow morning.
The facts determine the response. You may need to clarify a misunderstanding or recognize that the client has a valid point. And after the issue is clear, the conversation needs somewhere to go. That may mean giving the client options. Suppose one part of a deliverable doesn't meet the client's current need. You could say, "We have two practical options. We can revise that section and keep the rest of the document as it is, or we can create a shorter version focused only on the information your team needs for the meeting."
If you have a professional recommendation, you can add it. Given the timing, I'd recommend the shorter version for the meeting. We can then update the full document afterward.
They can see two possible ways forward and understand which one you recommend.
And when the client chooses, make the decision actionable.
The client might say, "Let's go with the shorter version for tomorrow."
Then you can close the loop. Okay, we'll prepare the shorter version today and send it to you by 4 p.m. We'll keep the full document as it is for now and update it after the meeting.
They know what will be delivered. They know when. And they know what will happen to the remaining work. Not every client concern will need that many steps. One clear explanation may be enough. In another case, the client may only need a small adjustment. But when the issue is more important, don't stop at, "I understand your concern." That acknowledges the situation, but it doesn't necessarily move the work forward.
Listen for what the real concern is. Respond to the facts you actually know. If something has been misunderstood, make it clear. If the client has a valid point, recognize it.
Then help turn the concern into a decision about what happens next.
And that brings together something important from everything we've practiced so far. A client conversation rarely stays in one place.
You may start by understanding what the client needs. Then you need to make sure you both mean the same thing. Later, you may explain the work, respond to a change, or answer a question you can't fully confirm yet.
As we've just seen, a concern can introduce new information and change what needs to happen next.
You've practiced these skills separately. Next, hear what happens when a client conversation moves from one need to another.
Here is the first complete client conversation. David is working with a client who needs a short briefing document for an internal meeting next week.
Thanks for sending over the background information. I've had a chance to look through it.
Great. We'd like to have something ready for our meeting next Wednesday.
Of course. What would you like the document to help your team understand before the meeting?
The main thing is the current situation.
Some people on the team haven't been involved in the project, so they need a quick overview before we discuss the next phase.
Okay. Would you like us to focus mainly on where the project stands now, or should we include the earlier background as well?
A little background would help, but I'd keep that part brief. The current situation is more important.
Got it. And will the document be used only before the meeting, or will you also be presenting from it during the discussion?
Just before the meeting, we'll have a separate presentation for the discussion itself.
That helps. In that case, we can keep the document short and make it easy to read without someone explaining it.
Yes, that's exactly what we need.
There's one thing I'd like to check before we prepare it. We have the project information through the end of last month. Do you want the latest activity included as well?
Yes, please. I can send you this month's information this afternoon.
Perfect. We can start with what we have and add the latest information once you send it.
When do you think we could see the first version?
We can send you a first version on Monday morning. That gives you time to review it before Wednesday's meeting.
Monday works for me.
Great. So we'll prepare a short briefing document for your team to read before the meeting. We'll keep the background brief, focus on the current situation, and include this month's information once you send it this afternoon. We'll send you the first version on Monday morning.
That sounds good. I'll send the information later today.
Thanks. Once we receive it, we'll have everything we need to complete the first version.
The conversation moved naturally across several skills without stopping at each one. The original request became clearer as David learned the purpose, the audience, how the document would be used, and what information was still needed.
And before the conversation ended, both sides had a clear picture of what would be prepared, what the client would provide, and what would happen next.
In the next conversation, the work is already underway. And then the client changes something.
This time, the work is already underway. David is helping a client prepare an online training session for employees in several locations. The date has been agreed, the materials are being prepared, and then the client asks for a change.
Hi, David. There's one change I wanted to discuss with you.
Sure. What would you like to change?
We'd like to include our Singapore team in the training as well. There are about 15 more people.
Okay. Adding another 15 participants should be manageable. I'll check the final numbers, but we can continue preparing the session as planned.
Great. There is one other thing, though.
Of course.
The current session starts at 3 p.m. our time, and that won't work well for the Singapore team.
I see. Are you thinking about moving the session to a different time for everyone?
We could, but I'm not sure that would work for our teams here. Another possibility is to run a separate session for Singapore.
Okay, that changes things a little more. Adding the participants to the existing session is straightforward, but a separate session would affect the schedule and some of the preparation.
Would you need to create all the materials again?
No, we can use the same core materials. We may need to adjust a few examples for that group, but most of the content can stay the same.
That's good. Could you run the second session on the same day?
That may be possible, but I don't want to confirm the timing until I've checked the trainer's availability.
Okay. We need to send the training schedule to everyone tomorrow. Would you be able to confirm before then?
Yes, I can check the trainer's schedule this afternoon and give you a firm answer by 4 p.m.
Perfect. If the trainer isn't available, what would our other option be?
We could keep the original session as planned and schedule the Singapore session for the following morning. That would give us more flexibility without affecting the first session.
I'd prefer the same day if possible, but the following morning would still work.
Understood. So we'll keep the original session and the current preparation moving forward. I'll check whether we can add a separate Singapore session on the same day and confirm that by 4 p.m. If that timing isn't available, we'll look at the following morning instead.
Sounds good. Once you confirm the time, I'll update the participant list and send the schedule to the teams.
Great. I'll get back to you this afternoon.
The important point is how the change developed during the conversation. Adding more participants was manageable, but the timing issue created a different decision.
Instead of treating everything as one new request, David separated what could continue, what needed checking, and when the client would have a firm answer.
In the next conversation, the challenge is different again. This time, the client has a genuine concern about the work itself.
In this conversation, the work has moved further along. David's team has helped a client set up the enrollment process for a new employee benefits program. The client has reviewed the process and has a concern about how it will work in practice.
David, I've gone through the enrollment process and I'm concerned that we're asking employees to do too much.
Okay. Which part of the process concerns you most?
There are several steps before they can complete the enrollment. I'm worried people will start and then not finish.
I understand. The first two steps collect the information we need before employees choose their benefits, but there may be some room to simplify what happens after that.
Could we just remove one or two of the steps?
Possibly. Before we change anything, I'd like to separate the steps we actually need from the ones we can simplify. That way we don't remove something that's necessary later.
That makes sense. There's another issue I should mention.
Sure.
About a third of our employees work away from our main locations. Some of them won't have access to the company system when they're completing the enrollment.
Okay, that changes the issue. If they can't access the system, reducing the number of steps may not solve the main problem.
Right. They could probably complete part of it on their phones, but not everything.
In that case, I think we should look at access and process length separately. We can simplify the enrollment for everyone, but we also need a workable route for employees who can't use the company system.
What would you recommend?
I see two realistic options. We could keep the main enrollment process online and give those employees another way to provide the information they can't enter themselves. Or we could arrange a short, supported enrollment period where someone helps them complete those steps.
Would the first option be easier to set up?
Yes, it would require less coordination, but someone on your side would still need to enter the remaining information into the system.
I'm not sure we have the capacity to do that for everyone.
Then I'd recommend the supported enrollment option. It takes a little more planning at the beginning, but employees can complete the process in one go, and your team won't have to enter the information afterward.
That sounds more practical. Could we still simplify the main process at the same time?
Yes. We've already identified two places where we can reduce what employees need to enter without removing information the program requires.
Okay, let's do both. Let's simplify those parts and use the supported option for employees who don't have full system access.
That works. We'll revise the main process around those two areas and map out how the supported enrollment would work. I'll send you the proposed approach tomorrow so you can review it with your HR team before we make the changes. Good. If they're comfortable with the approach, we can move ahead from there. Once you've reviewed it with them, we'll know which changes to put into the final setup.
The first concern sounded like a problem with too many steps. But once the client explained the access issue, the real decision became bigger.
That's why a useful response can change as you learn more, and why understanding the concern comes before choosing the solution.
It's your turn to respond to the client. You'll hear a short situation, and then the client will speak to you.
Take a moment to think about what the client needs from you, then answer in your own words.
After that, you'll hear one possible response. Your answer doesn't need to be the same. The goal is to communicate clearly and move the conversation forward.
You're helping a client prepare information for a new office opening. The client says, "Could you put together some information about the new location for us?" You could say, "Of course. What will you be using the information for, and what would you like people to understand from it?" Here, you're not guessing what some information means. You're finding out what the client actually needs it to do.
You've discussed an upcoming site visit with a client. You need to make sure both sides are working from the same plan.
The client says,
So I think we have everything covered for the visit.
One possible response is, just to confirm, your team will arrange access to the site and we'll prepare the equipment and arrive at 9 a.m. on Thursday.
The response brings the main responsibilities and timing together in one clear confirmation.
You're coordinating a workspace setup for a client.
Some of the work is finished, but one part still needs to be completed.
The client asks, where are we with the setup?
You could say, the main workstations are ready, and we're finishing the meeting areas today. Your team can start using the main workspace tomorrow, and we expect the remaining areas to be ready by Friday.
The client gets more than a list of completed tasks. They also know what they can use and what happens next. You're arranging a professional event for a client. The room and basic setup have already been booked for 60 people.
The client says, we may need space for another 20 people. Can we add them?
One possible response is, we can look at increasing the number. I'll need to check whether the current room can fit 80 people and whether the setup would need to change.
You've acknowledged the change without promising that the original arrangement will still work. You're coordinating a product sample shipment for a client. The samples are ready, but the pickup time from the delivery company hasn't been confirmed.
The client asks, can you guarantee that the samples will arrive on Tuesday?
You could say, the samples are ready to go, but I can't confirm Tuesday yet because we're still waiting for the pickup time. I'll have an update from the delivery company this afternoon and confirm the delivery date with you then. The samples being ready is confirmed. Tuesday isn't. Your response keeps that difference clear. Your team has prepared a booking process for appointments at a client's facility. The client has tested it with a small group.
They tell you, I'm concerned that people are having trouble finding an available appointment.
One possible response is, I understand. Are people having trouble seeing the available times, or are there not enough suitable times available?
For the final challenge, put several skills together. You're coordinating an equipment installation for a client's new facility. The installation is planned for Monday and Tuesday. Your team can complete the main installation as planned, but the client has just changed when one area of the facility will be available.
The client says, we've just learned that the back area won't be available until Tuesday afternoon. We still need everything ready by Wednesday morning. Can you make that work?
Think about what you know. Part of the work can continue. One part has changed, and you don't yet know whether the original completion time is still realistic.
One possible response is, we can continue with the main installation on Monday as planned. The back area will need to move to Tuesday afternoon. I need to check how much time that part requires before I confirm Wednesday morning, but I can review the schedule with the team today and give you a firm answer by 3 p.m.
That response doesn't treat the whole project as delayed. It protects what can still move forward, identifies what has changed, and leaves only the uncertain part unconfirmed.
And there are other good ways you could respond. What matters is whether your answer helps the client understand the situation and what happens next.
And that's where real client communication starts to feel more manageable.
Because talking to a client isn't just about knowing the right phrase. You need to understand what they really need, respond to the information you have, and adjust when something changes.
And when you don't have a complete answer yet, or the client raises a concern, you can still keep the conversation moving without promising more than you know.
Before you leave, think about one client conversation you actually have in your work. It could be giving an update, responding to a new request, or answering a question you can't confirm immediately. Choose one response from today's lesson that would help in that conversation and practice saying it in your own words. The goal isn't to memorize every sentence. It's to be ready when a similar moment happens in your own work. If this lesson was useful for you, subscribe to Business English for Success for more practical English you can use at work. Thanks for learning with us, and we'll see you in the next lesson.